What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be checking out the history of the Philippines before Magellan. But before I get into videos, today's sponsor is Better Alternative Skincare. Natural, organic skincare products. From soaps, bath bombs, and creams. They got it all. Check them out at betteralternativeskincare.com. Use code KEVO2024 for your 20% discount. And now back to the video.
The Philippines is an archipelago in the Pacific Ocean, consisting of over 7,000 islands. It sits
lot of islands.
in a subduction zone in the Ring of Fire, the geologic belt that surrounds the Pacific, and is the source of a great deal of the seismic activity experienced from Japan to Alaska to California. This geologic history has made the islands mineral rich, but also means the inhabitants must deal with the destructive potential of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Of the 7,000 islands, only about 1,000 have human habitation, and most of those are around 1 square mile in size. The archipelago is split into 3 islands.
Yeah, but they got people living on the other islands, maybe like tribal people who traveled over to these smaller islands. They do have people living. I believe there's more than just 1,000. Let me know in the comments down below.
Groups: Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. Mindanao is the southernmost group. The Visayas are the central set, and Luzon is the northernmost, named for the largest island in the group, and in the Philippines as a whole. The island of Luzon is the most populated.
Yeah, this is where I've been.
Includes the capital of Manila. The earliest trace of Homo sapiens, the modern human, is approximately 47,000 years ago. They were preceded by earlier hominids, Homo luzonensis, named for where it was found near Luzon, is dated to approximately 134,000 years ago.
Wow.
And there is evidence that places Homo erectus on the islands as far back as 700,000 years ago.
That's insane,
The ancestors
actually.
of the modern native population had established themselves by around 3000 BCE, having migrated from Taiwan, other nearby islands, and the Asian mainland. They were Austronesian, meaning they belonged to a socio-cultural and language group spread across maritime Southeast Asia and reached as far west as Madagascar.
Like, sometimes when you think about it, like, the Filipino people are like mixed with a lot of different races. Like, there's so many races in just the Philippines. There's just like a whole bunch of them mixed into one. This is why I say a lot of Filipino people, they look like, some of them look like Mexicans. I don't want to say it. They look Mexicans. Some of them look like from Japan. Some of them look Chinese. It's just a whole bunch of like different nationalities and nations mixed together. And that's what makes them so like cool and unique. And it's why sometimes I feel like I always say this one day. Like, one day I believe that what the world's gonna become, it's just gonna become a whole bunch of mixed people together. No one's gonna know what their background is. It's just gonna be one mixed unit. That's what I feel like the world's gonna end up. And that's why I feel like the world should be. It shouldn't be blacks, it shouldn't be whites, Asians. It should be just everyone just mixed together, and it's called a mixed race, and that's it. That's the only race, the human race. That's the way it should be. But till then, we got our, our Asians, we got our whites, we got blacks, and yeah.
Austronesian is the parent language of Malay, or Indonesian, Taiwanese, Tagalog, and others spoken throughout islands in the South Pacific. Early settlements in the Philippines tended to stay along rivers, and tended to be somewhat isolated by geography. Because of this, they did not develop an overarching political connection, instead maintaining communities via intermarriage and other kinship relations. Trade between and amongst the islands and the mainland was well established by 2000 BCE, evidenced by Philippine jade artifacts found throughout the local area, produced using techniques common to India in the Philippines.
Wow.
These objects, along with ideas and the people who carried them, traveled via the Maritime Jade Road, a massively extensive trade network that existed for approximately 3,000 years, until 1000 CE. The last 1,500 years of this era appear to be a time of extended peace throughout the Philippine Islands and the nearby area. This is evidenced in part by the trade itself, but it is also supported by a lack of archaeological finds of human bones that show evidence of a violent death. Such evidence, however, may simply have not yet been found. Written Philippine history begins around 900 CE. The earliest document is the Laguna copperplate inscription, which is a record of the forgiveness of a debt. By this time, the people of the archipelago had begun to organize themselves into socio-political units called barangays. These are akin to a city-state.
And the thing about it, they still have these barangays till like today. Like barangays are still something. Because I remember when I was in Cebu traveling around, one of my friends actually told me their grandfather was the barangay, and I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I didn't really know what that was till I met him, and he explained it to me. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So it's kind of like how we in Canada we have like provinces, and in the Philippines I guess they have barangays. It's kind of like the premiers for each province. This is basically the same thing, just different wording and different name. That was pretty cool.
Small as 30 people, or as large as 500.
Like towns and stuff like that.
These came together in confederacies, ruled by a paramount leader chosen from among the rulers of the allied polities, called datus. In areas that had greater contact with the Indian subcontinent, they called the rulers Raja. Later, in areas that had adopted Islam, they were called sultans.
And that's the more
Society within these barangays was organized by class, with the highest being the Maginoo. Next, the freemen, the Maharlika, then finally the enslaved, the Alipin, all with subcategories to specify a person's status. The early cultures of the Philippines practiced a polytheistic animism, in which all things have a spirit that must be attended in order to maintain good fortune and avoid bad. Ancestor worship was also included in this, with the ancestors sometimes taking on the aspect of animals, and vice versa. Magic and witchcraft were widely believed to have influence, and those who practiced these could be highly respected and/or greatly feared. Filipinos were introduced to Buddhism and Hinduism sometime before the 9th century CE. The archaeological record and documents found in China and India show that some Philippine barangays and islands owed tribute to the Srivijaya Empire, a powerful Indonesian Buddhist state that controlled the maritime trade in the area between the 6th and 13th centuries. Their influence was followed by that of the Majapahit, a Hindu Buddhist state centered on the island of Java. Both Buddhism and Hinduism influenced the existing belief systems and culture, and influence was made easier by the language connections that seemed to exist between Philippines and Indian Sanskrit. Islam first arrived in the Philippines via a missionary, Makdum Karim, in 1380. He accompanied merchants and preached Sunni Islam to people in the Sulu archipelago. He is also credited with building the first mosque in the Philippines.
Oh wow.
He was followed a decade later by the Indonesian Minangkabau Prince Raja Baguinda, who also set up the Sulu Sultanate. In the early 15th century, the Chinese mariner Zhang founded Chinese Muslim communities in the Philippines. This history of the Philippines is generally organized as pre- and post-colonial. Most of the information we have on the centuries leading up to the Spanish arrival is provided through the chronicles and histories of other countries, notably China. Some of these are in passing, or only noted in trade records. Others stand out, and a bit more of their story can be told. The oldest documented barangay is Tondo, a large polity located on the Pasig River Delta in the modern Manila Bay. They were associated with the nearby Maynila, which was an independent barangay with whom they shared monopolies on trade across Southeast Asia. This trade was sufficiently important to the Chinese that under the Yongle Emperor of the Ming Dynasty, a governor was appointed to oversee it. In fact, most of the documented information we have about the Philippines in the pre-colonial era comes from records of other countries with whom the various barangay interacted. China provides the most extensive of these, but
when I was there last time in the Philippines, people were saying that China is constantly trying to like take the islands away from the Philippines. But I'm starting to think, like, is it because China thinks pretty much they owned the Philippines before, or they had a lot of influence on the Philippines? Maybe that's why they keep constantly trying to invade and take islands back from the Philippines. I think that's one of the major problems a lot of Filipinos don't like. They don't like that the Chinese keep trying to take their islands. They hate that. So, but now I'm starting to think, like, there probably is a reason, because there's a lot of records that Chinese did a lot of things in the Philippines. Maybe that's why they want trying to get some islands back.
But there is corroborating information from Japan, Champa,
Okay.
India, and others. This kingdom had declined by the early 16th century and had been overtaken by the Luzon. The Luzon were the local peoples around Tondo who took the opportunity of the conquest by Brunei to assert themselves. They were a militaristic culture who were involved in wars all over the Philippines, Indonesia, and mainland Asia.
They got tired of people taking their stuff.
Their state, and sometimes as individuals and groups acting as mercenaries. Another largely documented state is the Sultanate of Sulu, so called even though the society pre-existed the introduction of Islam and its political terminology.
Is this place still here? This island down here is that like still there? Like this, honestly? Someone put in the comments, is this still here? I would like to know that. That'd be pretty cool if I can actually visit something like this.
In the 12th and 13th centuries, people from the Visayas area moved into the Sulu archipelago, in the Mindanao section of the Philippine Islands. They established their state and were known to trade throughout the area, including with the people of Champa on the Indonesian peninsula, some of whom moved to Sulu. There was a short war between the Sulu and the Champa in the 12th century, after which trade was normalized again, shortly before they were overtaken by an outside power. In the 13th century, according to Chinese records, the area was under the control of the Bruneian Sultanate, along with Ma'ai and Manila. Little else is said, except that they regained their independence at some later date. They had certainly done so by the early 15th century, when its leader, Raja Baguinda, converted to Islam and was independently ruling the now Sultanate. Sometime before the 11th century, the Rajanate of Butuan emerged on the island of Mindanao. It was a mixed kingdom, with the majority of people practicing Hinduism, but the leadership practicing Buddhism. They were known for their expertise with gold and had extensive trade ties with China, as well as with the various kingdoms of the Indochina Peninsula. There were other major independent polities, of whom less is known. They had separate agreements for trade with surrounding states and different cultural influences from them. The Cabaloan barangay was greatly influenced by China and Japan. Their clothing reflected the styles of both, as did cultural norms like blackened teeth. Other polities like Marae and Peleliu were trade partners with China. There is also evidence of conflict between the people of the Visayan section of the archipelago and towns on the Chinese coastline, instigated by the Filipinos. In the decades prior to European
So the Philippines would attack China. Wow. They were very, like that. There's a saying that says, give me 1,000 Filipinos and I'll take it over the world. Now I'm starting to see why. They didn't care. Even though they're a smaller nation, they still did not let that stop them. They still powered through. They had the heart and the will. That's the one thing I would honestly say about the Filipino people. They have that heart and the strength that it'll do anything.
Contact, the Bruneian Sultanate again pushed into the Philippines. They started with Tondo and Manila Bay, with the idea of breaking their monopoly on the Chinese trade of certain goods. They were successful, establishing Selarong, also known as the Kingdom of Manila, as a vassal state in 1500. Their leader, Sultan Bolkiah, married into the ruling family of the Sultanate of Sulu, thereby connecting those two powers. The first contact between the people of the Philippines and Europeans was in 1521, when the Spanish expedition to circumnavigate the globe, led by the Portuguese navigator Ferdinand Magellan. They anchored off Suluan Island, in the central part of the archipelago on the 14th of March, 1521. Magellan planted the Spanish flag.
Yep, this is where Magellan thought he could take over the world and take over the Philippines, but no. He quickly learned that Filipino people are not pushovers.
Calling the islands the Islas de San Lazaro.
You already had a name, buddy.
The next day, they landed at nearby Hamanhan Island, where Magellan met with the leaders of the Cebu and Limasawa peoples. Their leader, the Raja Humaban, spoke at length with Magellan, and then decided to convert to Catholicism, Spanish priests in the expedition baptized him, his wife, and many of their household. In the tradition of taking a new or additional name at one's baptism, the Raja became Carlos, in honor of King Charles I of Spain. His wife took the name Juana, in honor of the king's mother, Joanna, daughter of the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella. The Raja then ordered the people of the nearby islands to welcome Magellan and his men, provide them with supplies, and convert to Catholicism. His level of influence is shown by the fact most of these people followed his lead into the church. However, Datu Lapu-Lapu, one of the chiefs on the island of Mactan, refused. Very little is known about him prior to these events.
I heard about that.
He was Humaban's rival for influence in the area. He rejected the idea of conversion and also prevented his neighboring leader, Datu Zula, from sending gifts to Magellan. This prompted Humaban and Zula to suggest that Magellan force the issue with a personal visit, which Magellan saw as an opportunity to both show strength to and a willingness to...
Yeah, I heard about... This is where Magellan found out that Lapu-Lapu was not a pushover either. Like, Lapu-Lapu was one of the strongest and deadliest warriors in the Philippines. I know this because they still have the airport in what's there, Cebu? They still got that airport there.
In an alliance with the local people.
Let's see.
On the 27th of April, 1521, Magellan and his force landed on Mactan and were immediately barraged with spears, rocks, and arrows. This initial attack was more demoralizing than deadly to the Spanish. Offshore, the Spanish saw this attack and shot with both muskets and crossbows, but were too far away to have an effect. Magellan's next move was to push toward the native village and set fire to some of the houses. This gave even more force behind the Mactan defense. Magellan was immobilized by a poisoned arrow to the leg, and many of his people were quickly killed. By the account of his chronicler Antonio Pigafetta, they focused on Magellan himself, which allowed a few of the Spanish to escape. Lapu-Lapu also made a point of killing all of the natives who aided the Spanish in their attack. This
did not know that.
Raja Humaban and Datu Zula. Despite their promise to fight alongside the Spanish, they stayed away. The Raja did try to ransom the body of the Portuguese navigator, but Lapu-Lapu refused any of his offers. Seeing the attitudes of his fellows, Humaban seems to have repudiated his conversion, going as far as to kill some of the Spanish soldiers who escaped the battle. The expedition continued on its way, returning to Spain the next year, having finished the first circumnavigation of the Earth. It was 4 decades before the Spanish or Portuguese again tried to take any Philippine territory.
They learned their lesson. That's insane. They learned their lesson. They said, not today, boy. Anyways, like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys thought. Bye.